Well, welcome, everybody. I trust you had a beautiful drive up here. We thank you so much for coming so far to be with us. The Mount St. Helens Foray, Destruction and Renewal. We've been camped for 4 days on a couple of ridges over. A gathering of scientists, creative writers, philosophers, musicians, photographers, and other humanists to ponder the meaning of cataclysms and renewal, that in a landscape that so eloquently speaks of those principles in loud voices, and whispers almost inaudible, to which only a caring voice can attend. So the foray is being sponsored by the Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word, a program in the philosophy department at Oregon State University. Our mission is to bring together the practical wisdom of the environmental sciences and the clarity of philosophical analysis and the expressive creative power of the written word to try to reimagine our relationships to nature. And all of us have been rearranged significantly in the past 4 days, I can promise you. And we've, a couple of years ago, began a program called Long-Term Ecological Reflections as an analog to the National Science Foundation's Long-Term Ecological Research Program, where we encourage writers and other humanists to take a long-term view of natural processes and interact with scientists who are doing long-term ecological research. And Fred Swanson from the U.S. Forest Service is going to tell you a little bit about the science connection to the program.
Allowing us to be here. I think of volcanoes as hurry-up moments in deep time. And if this particular mountain took, let's say, 40,000 years, as I think I heard Charlie and some other people say, to build the bulk of its size, I have to remember that even 40,000 years is only 1/100,000th of the time that the Earth has been here as a sphere floating through the universe. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I wrote a book about volcanoes and the effects that they have had on human culture around the world. And so I'm going to read 2 brief passages from that book. Here's how the book opens, and it's a kind of riff on what I think volcanoes do, what people have told me they do. Here's how it starts. Rock moves. It moves all the time, everywhere, in big ways and small, through deep time and fast forward, on the surface of the earth and far below it. And in and around volcanoes, rock flies, at times faster and farther than any bird. Or it flows like tar or water. It floats on water. It burns on water. Glowing rock chunks the size of bowling balls bob and hiss in the South Pacific, the Gulf of Alaska, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean. Earth, air, fire, water, the 4 classic elements that form the world, all jumbled up, none of them acting the way you think they should. Over the long arc of time, volcanoes heave themselves up into high holy mountains and haunted summits. They burst apart, they erode back down. Their lavas leap and turn with the grace of sandhill cranes in their mating dance. They breathe, roar, and sing. And singing, volcanic rocks and fires can deeply affect the way we see and hear the world and act in the world, the stories we tell about the world. And then to jump ahead, one of the things I was most impressed about this weekend was the emotional effect that this mountain and that volcanoes in general have on people and on some of their most deeply held beliefs. And I heard that from scientists every bit as eloquently as from the so-called official eloquent people, the poets and the essayists. And I'm going to read a very brief section from Montserrat, the small island in the Caribbean. The entire island could fit in this landscape that we see here, 11 miles by 6 miles. In 1995, after 400 years of silence, the highest point on the island, Soufriere Hills, began to erupt, and everybody had to back off. The problem with a small island like that is that there isn't enough room to back off sometimes. And here's what happened to one particular person and the way he rearranged some of his most deeply held beliefs to accommodate what happened to him. He was a man I saw, I was standing looking at the destruction that the volcano had created. He spoke so gently to me, this island man, even about nature's violence. He unwrapped his sentences a syllable at a time. For a while we simply stood together in silence, looking at where the volcano had come down. Then he began to tell me about himself, his wife, and kids, and their home in Plymouth, the capital, which had to be abandoned, with its sloped rows of banana stalks, sweet potatoes, dasheen, cassava. They had a backyard bush they loved called the Pride of the Barbados, whose yellow flowers attracted butterflies that his youngest boy liked to chase in wobbly circles, as though he were a butterfly himself. Soufriere, the most common species, was called sulfur butterfly. He said, I'm not going to do the Haymon thing. He said, house, job, the whole damn town, all gone now. Gone also, I thought, in a lively sense of community. Calypso bands that pounded away under the big twisted tree on Plymouth's town square. The musicians playing as much for the locals as for the cruise ship crowds. I told him he seemed amazingly even-tempered, considering how much he'd lost and whatever it was the future held. He shrugged. He scratched his beard. Got my health, he said. Got my wife and kids. It wasn't quite noon, but the sun was already sledgehammering my brain. I'd left my hat in the car. A breeze crackled through an acacia tree behind me and sent some yellow butterflies tumbling past. The man from Plymouth folded his arms and said, you know, this volcano will be all over one day. Lots of tourists again. I wanted badly to believe this. I heard from a person on the island that after months of waffling, the government had agreed to pay airfares for whoever wanted to resettle in England, and that thousands of refugees had taken them up on it. The more we talked, though, the more I suspected that this man from Plymouth would never be one of them. Besides, he explained to me, turning to me, some good had come out of all this, something few people ever get to see. He smiled sweetly. Whenever he felt like it, he said, he could walk his 3 boys up here or to some other places and show them the island's expanding shoreline, the ever-growing mountain. It was proof of God's power, the Old Testament come back to life. You know, he said, the Lord, he made this world in 7 days. On this mountain, he making it again.
I'm Jim Sedell. I'm an aquatic ecologist and science manager with the Forest Service, and represent the water people that came to the mountain to look at the impacts on water and its aquatic ecosystems, along with Jerry and Fred and Jim McMahon and Charlie and a number of others. And this week has been a really this last few days have been really kind of one of reconciliation and integration for me. I thought I was to be coming here to essentially spin stories of what I saw and what are the technical aspects of the story. And there's no question that when I arrived here, there's just so much of a sense of discovery of who survived, being hit with big fish in streams that were just moving concrete, to the emergence of life from deep within the bowels of the mountain in the form of, after the lava dome started, 2 days later, we discovered a primitive bacteria that came up from the steam vents deep in the mountain, these archibacters we call dome bugs. To a stream of which I'd grown, or to a lakes in this area which I'd grown up to think were clean, bright water that you can see right to the bottom of that had organisms that I understood like caddisflies, sponges, salamanders, and it was driven by sunlight, primarily in the form of algae or leaves that came from the adjacent forest. And suddenly I'm confronted with a lake that is a bubbling, gaseous, smelly body of water that has none of the life forms I've done and is now driven and ruled by the mountain. And it's driven by the mountain's minerals. It's driven by the ground up forest that that curtain of ash and rock did. And it's driven by forms that I don't know anything about anymore. These are metal eaters, and instead of being dead, this is billions of cells in a thimble full of water that are just churning away here. It's a cooking alive thing, but nothing I relate to at all. In fact, it's a fingerprint, a chemical fingerprint that would most resemble a pulp mill lagoon. And we were supposed to go in and sample these things and make sense. Unlike the terrestrial thing, the things in water happen very fast. I mean, fish have recovered very quickly in many of the areas, even though the streams haven't fully recovered in terms of a base sediment, a bit of a tea color. Water quality has drastically improved in the first year or two. So these things went by, and we're now in the more prosaic analysis as it slows down the succession of events, or the lack of succession of events in some of these cases on there. But I think the thing that struck me most about this were not the science stories, because that's what I've immersed myself in the last 20-some years, or in fact most of my career. But it was the reintegration of the emotional and the getting back into more balance of the heart and the mind. And certainly the poets you've heard here today are much more eloquent than I'll ever be in terms of the written word. But it really evoked this sense of loss that Anne talked about, and the awe that Scott talked about. That was very much overwhelming. And that in our mind clatter of hypothesis and changes and predictions and whatnot, that you stayed up here and you really never reintegrated that and reconciled those raw primal emotions. At the same time, you were totally adrenalized into trying to understand, and each round of a bend was a new discovery, a new something or other. And so this was a weekend I got to acknowledge the feelings of the mountain and relive some of that. Thank you.
I'm Nalini Nadkarni. I'm a forest ecologist. I work at the Evergreen State College. And my specialty and passion is the forest canopy. And actually last week I was doing some field work with some students down at the Cedar Flats Research Natural Area, which is in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. And as we climbed these 90-meter tall trees and peeled back the moss mats that we were looking at, we saw that there was a layer of deposition of ash that had obviously been there for a very, very long time. And it was to us very fascinating that existed. And in anticipation of coming here to Mount St. Helens, I thought, oh great, this is a good time to collect some ash and do some experiments and see whether the ash sifts through these moss mats and how it stays there and so forth. But as it turned out, I never did those experiments. And this last few days, perhaps because we were in the company of poets and people who were sort of paid to allow emotions to come out, I found myself reacting very emotionally to the scene of many, many thousands of trees that are dead. And perhaps because I make my living and my spirit is very much tied up with trees, it's been a hard few days for me, and I think other people too. First because I think it just, I can do nothing to protect those trees. They're dead, and they symbolize also other trees that I can't protect because of either natural or man-made forces. And trees, in some ways, I always think of as protecting me. So it was very troubling to me to realize my powerlessness in all of that. On the other hand, the presence of people writing poetry about this, the biologists who were pointing out all the different aspects of succession and recovery, did help in some ways to move that despair to hope. And I think part of the sense of hope is that everybody in this group, whether they were scientists or poets or philosophers, had a sense of passion about protection. And I'd like to share a poem that I read around the campfire the other night that to me exemplifies hope in the light of powerlessness. And I love this poem because it's written from the perspective of a tree. It's called Wanting to Move, and it's by a Bengali poet named Vijaya Muktopadhyay. Continually, a bell rings in my heart. I was supposed to go somewhere, to some other place, tense from the long wait. Where do you go? Will you take me with you on your horses, down the river with the flames of your torches? They burst out laughing. A tree, wanting to move from place to place? Startled, I looked at myself. A tree, wanting to move from place to place? A tree, wanting to move? Am I then born here, to die here, even die here? Who rings the bell then inside my heart? Who tells me to go inside my heart? Who agitates me continually inside my heart?
Hi, my name's Gary Braasch. I'm a photographer. As some of you may know who went to the Gary Snyder, Jerry Franklin duet on the anniversary of the eruption, and I gave my little prologue in photographs. You know that I've been here since the eruption, lucky enough to be on the safe side of the mountain, and to come back over these years very early in the field with the scientists that are here. It's a thrill to see them again. I was especially excited to hear the great talks we had in depth of the science that's going on here, and to hear the poetry of science, words like amplexus and tephra and frass, and to feel again the connection that they obviously had with the land in their hearts, not just in their data books and in their computers. But one thing that's happened to me this last few days is I made a new connection with the mountain I hadn't thought much about. When I emerged from that early round of photography, I was traveling with a slideshow called The Creation of Mount St. Helens. And I had in mind at that time the recreation of the Cascades landscape, which we all came to love. I was mostly on Mount Hood rather than Mount St. Helens when I was a climber and so forth. But I saw it as the way that all these landscapes begin. But what I also see is the mountain is creating a space. It's ripped open the landscape. It's exposed the landscape, removed all the trees, opened up the rivers and the lakes to whatever. We know that many species have come in that weren't here before, plus all that were here already. And this act of creation has just thrown it open to all kinds of possibilities, removed any kinds of pretension as to what it might have been, and removed a certainty of what it's going to be again. And I think that's the way I feel here, and I think that it means to me that this mountain is creating not only the raw material of the landscape, but it's also creating the raw material of our science, of conservation movements, of our art and literature and poetry, even of our humanity, and I hope also of our beliefs. And I'm very glad and thankful to have been here this weekend. Thank you.
My name is Lynn Burdett, and I am a very smelly public servant, to build off of Ursula's thoughts. And I'm going to be in a bit of an organic place, because as we came over here, got the opportunity to interact with some of our folks who do interpretation and engage with the public at all times, and wanted to acknowledge Sue and Greg and Ken and Maggie and all the others who do that. And one of the things that was really striking to me was that we've been on the quiet side of the mountain to a large degree. We've engaged with people, we've seen some people, some folks have interacted with us. And then Greg, as we were sitting and talking, mentioned that yesterday, while we were quietly sitting in the forest, Nalini mentioned, 8,000 people were visiting Johnston Ridge Observatory, and he was busy trying to engage with them. And I think that's one of the pieces that's really an additional part to this, is the relevance of this place as a network of public lands, and how it can help us connect with people to the value of public lands and the need for the ongoingness of them. There's a number of public servants here, and all of us are honored and have gratitude that we're allowed to take that responsibility and that role. And many people have dedicated their lives to doing that. And so just wanted to kind of modify my thoughts a little bit and say that people of all ages are drawn here to the volcano. They come from around the world. They interact with the volcano they interact with the landscape, they interact with our facilities, our visitor centers, our interpreters, and they also interact with each other. It's a unique opportunity to connect people to public lands, and we've had some discussion about that. How might we stimulate more opportunities that would engage people with beauty and natural processes, that would engage their desire to learn, and that also might help them think about their place in the environment, our world, and the choices that they make and how they go about their lives. This is a place where we can help connect people to that in different ways. The experiences that people have here create memories. Many of them are life-lasting. Many of them are intergenerational. We've seen at least 3 generations that are interacting together here. Some of them are life-changing, and you've heard a few of those stories here. There's many life-changing stories. It's a thing that people come here about. So how might we create an opportunity where people could take their stories, instead of just hearing the mountain stories, connect us with their story and their relationship to the land? And we've, again, had some discussion about that. It's going to be an ongoing, organic, integrating kind of process. And one of the things that really struck me as Jerry was talking, we talked a bit about the word recovery and the word response and what really speaks to people. And the notion that recovery implies there's sort of a right answer, whatever one of us might visualize it, and we all probably have different visions. And so just to sort of pretend like I'm in the poet realm, I have a quote from Ursula that I will probably not say correctly, but it really struck me that it's part of the recovery concept. And it is good to have an end to journey towards, but it is the journey that matters in the end. And that's really what we're all on together with the mountain. And then one last one to share is from May Sarton on a whole different coast, saying, "Help us to be ever faithful gardeners of the Spirit, who know that without darkness nothing comes to birth, and without light nothing flowers." And so how can all of you together working with us help create that opportunity to integrate people with the value of public lands and a desire to retain the vast legacy that we have in this country? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Charlie Crisaifulli, an ecologist with the Forest Service in Olympia, Washington. And I've been around Mount St. Helens for a long time now, since it erupted, and it's been a really nice few days that we've had, seeing a number of my old friends that are in the audience now and going over old times together. Last night was really fun, and earlier in the week. And also all the great new people that I've met. I've been deeply entrenched and engaged in science here for a long time, and it's the way I tend to think. And it was really nice, and it wasn't easy, but I was sort of pried out of that a little bit, believe it or not, by all of you, so thanks for that. You know, when Mount St. Helens erupted, the scientific community, as well as others, viewed the eruption as an unusual, a unique, anomalous, thank you, and perhaps a special case. And what I'd like to do, and other communities did as well, not just the scientific communities, and what I'd like to do in the next couple of minutes is just talk a little bit about how maybe we ought to revisit that view. Volcanoes are globally distributed, and there's over 500 of them today that are active terrestrially and far more on the ocean floor. They're pervasive agents of change, as you can tell, both for landforms as well as for organisms, ecological systems. Cascadia is deeply rooted in volcanism, as evidenced by all the volcanic peaks that punctuate our north-south trending Cascade Range. And although numerous volcanoes erupt infrequently relative to any one person's lifetime, so consequently, we're really fortunate that Mount St. Helens erupted in our lifetime, in our backyard, and we were able to be here shortly after to witness this, because she has a lot to teach us. And if we pay attention and invest some time, we're bound to come away with some valuable lessons, particularly the way in which Cascadian life responds to this very pervasive form of disturbance that's been repeated over millennia. As an ecologist, I have spent over 1,500 days out on this volcanic landscape, studying survival, colonization, and the relationships that have developed among organisms and their environment. And that's been personally a really rewarding career to date. In that time, I've learned the cast of characters, including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, fungi, insects, and plants. There's been numerous opportunities for learning and study, and countless juicy surprises along the way. Some of these include unique opportunities, such as out on a debris avalanche. We often think of disturbances as reducing habitat, eliminating it, but they also created 100 and some ponds were created behind us a couple of miles on a debris avalanche. We all thought amphibians, conventional wisdom, wouldn't do very well in the face of environmental change, yet 12 of 15 species survived out in the blast area. These new ponds I was just referring to, within a couple of years, the first frogs, salamanders, and toads had arrived, and within 8 years' time, all of the possible species within the larger Cascade Providence had colonized, and many of them are doing very well. So we've learned a lot, and that had never been able to be tested before in any biome anywhere in the world. Primary succession of amphibians at a landscape scale, and it's been a phenomenal data set that's been used by many people other than those at St. Helens. Another example includes the avian, or the bird component. Behind us in this area known as the Pumice Plain was a former forest. Of course, that's gone, and with that, the forest birds are obviously not present. But what has happened is a very unusual, a bizarre assemblage of birds have colonized. Birds like horned larks, western meadow larks, Canada geese, rock wrens, savanna sparrows, red-winged blackbirds. These are birds of the east side, okay, the dry shrub steppe, or birds of the Puget Trough meadows, Willamette Valley. So what we're seeing is a lot of opportunity for unique assemblages to colonize. And so Mount St. Helens has been a really important learning place through time. Much change has occurred over the intervening years, and indeed change and dynamism is the central theme to Mount St. Helens. And I hope as we enter the second quarter century, we can keep our fingers on the pulse, the ecological pulse at Mount St. Helens, and we can learn far more as this dynamism ensues. Thank you.
We have been called to the mountain, our teacher, Lewitt, to be with the water people, the stone people, the forest people, the singer and the butterfly man, the strong angel who sees trees as ladders to Eden. How can we send our seeking beyond the mind? Radio telemetry on a few toadlets. Intuition beyond affectionate study. We bless our idea tree, rooted deep and sending notions, songs, facts, and sacred questions into the sunlight. From magma 7 miles down through a slender pipe to the vent that spews 2 looks across the land, how can we be the straw, the path, the bridge, the song, the report, the conversation, the listening that will carry reconciliation from the broken place to the mending place? Wisdom may travel by many paths. A puff of steam from the mountain and through earth by some transect through the wild mind. Lewitt whispers, "Thank you for letting me be your teacher." From our time, go and be who you now will be. From our time, go and do what you now will do. When a mountain has spoken to you, you will not need to be afraid. Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. At the hard place, there will be a key under the stone.
Hi, my name is Robin Kimmerer. I come here from upstate New York. I'm a plant ecologist and a writer, and ever so grateful to have been part of this remarkable gathering. I'm also by nature a listener, and together we've been listening to this landscape and to each other. And from that listening, you may hear some of your own words, campmates, in these words of gratitude for the time that we've spent together. We live in a world of gifts, which we remember every morning as we set our feet upon the earth and take in the breath of lupins. So filled up with the world are we that we breathe it back again to be held in trust by grass. We breathe our thanks in gratitude for the presence of you, Luwit, too terrible to look at, too beautiful to look away, where stones can float on water, where soils fall like rain from the sky. In gratitude we look upon each other, for those among us who are witnesses to the history of this place, from the serenity of its unbroken slopes to the cataclysm, to the urgency of land making itself anew. We're grateful for those who give us new eyes to see with words of light and songs of power, for those who fought to hold this place, for the right of natural processes to proceed substantially unimpeded, for coyotes that howl across the high ridge, and for humans that sing up the moon, for the abiding forces of destruction and the abiding forces of creation, and the glimmer of understanding that they're the same thing. We stand together in gratitude for the gifts received from the land. We stand together with jubilation for the gifts that we might return. Where I come from, among the Iroquois people, there's a song that's raised in praise for all of these gifts. And I would ask my fellow fire circle singers, would you all come up and let's share this song with everybody else, and then we can sing it all together in praise of this place.
Member of the staff in the philosophy department at Oregon State University. So in a small way, we represent this duality of the humanities and the sciences. I wanted to make some comments about the importance of long-term ecological research and then how it links with the long-term ecological reflections. And then also, what's the connection with the Forest Service? The National Science Foundation established long-term ecological research program 25 years ago, the same year as the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And the initial emphasis was on taking long-term views in science, setting up experiments with long time horizons. We have some experiments with 200-year time horizons, for example. And also to do retrospective work to reconstruct history of forests and watersheds through various techniques of historical reconstruction. But from my perspective, working in this program now for a quarter of a century, the most important aspect has been the long-term working relationships among scientists of different disciplines, between the science community and the land management community. And now we hope that we will begin to cultivate long-term partnerships between the ecosystem science community and the humanities. And in that way, we develop sort of a human community that's a seedbed for discovery of interesting new ideas. New ideas in places we may have worked for many decades. The Forest Service has a role in this, and this project does have substantial Forest Service support. Comes from the role of the Forest Service operating on behalf of our society to administrate powerful places of learning, such as Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument and experimental forest. We have one nearby here, Wind River. I've spent much of my career at H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest east of Eugene in the Willamette National Forest. these are places where we have already invested many decades of learning effort through the tools of science. And we're overdue to employ the tools of the humanities in learning from these very charismatic landscapes. And an important part of the work here through the Forest Service is to help the public appreciate lands, ecosystems, and especially the public lands that we all own. To close then, I did want to point out that we have, in addition to this remarkable setting for a poetry reading, posters as door prizes. And Val Rapp at the back here will make these available as you depart. And finally, we'd like to thank the Gifford Pinchot National Forest and the National Volcanic Monument for going out of their way to help us have this venue today in what's prime time for their interpretive programs. And we appreciate that deeply. And we hope we will, in a sense, feed back into the forest program through this kind of work, where they communicate with many hundreds of thousands of people who come and visit here in person, and many more through the media. Thank you.
Two people who aren't here this afternoon, who have been with us all the past 4 days at the Foray and were instrumental in the entire program. Libby Roderick is a wonderful folk singer from Alaska, and that was Libby you heard singing the first two songs before we started, and Libby had to run back off to her tour this morning. And Kathleen Dean Moore is the director of the Spring Creek Project, and really our guiding light in all our discussions and a whole program. And she also had to run off to another program this morning, so wanted you to know about those two important contributors. So we've been camped on the mountain since Thursday, just a couple of ridges over. We have walked what the ecologists call the disturbance gradient. We've walked in places that were, totally changed by the blast, to places that were altered but began to return to some kind of similar state that they were in, to places that were only to what they call the ashed forest, where some ash fell, but only a light change. And we're thinking as we went about analogs in our own lives when we suffered and when society suffers major disturbances. And we've talked in small groups, large groups, one-on-one with new acquaintances. We've shed tears into this ground at considering the devastation that occurred here, and getting in touch with some of the analogous things that might have happened in our own lives. And we danced and sung right at the edge of Genesis. We've seen steam plumes rising out of the caldera, as we see a little wisp of them now. We saw lightning on the mountain Friday. We got soaked and shivered to the bone Friday when it rained all morning. We've been warmed to the core in the last few days by this sun, and shivered on the outside by the wind. We've been expanding our sense. People come right up to the edge of their known world, and then somebody takes their hand and the conversation goes off the edge. So people have been thinking new thoughts in this, and the collaboration of scientists and artists and other humanists makes that happen with remarkable excitement and remarkable promise. So we've been in a highly expansive mode, but since last night we've been thinking about contracting and taking some of these insights and packing them down and making them denser and richer and more fragrant. We've been thinking about making seeds that we could hand to you and ask you to carry down into your life and your world. And we're so grateful that you've come all this way, because we've made these seeds. Now what do we do with them? And so you've come up all this way to help us disseminate these seeds. And even better than that, you have brought more rich material from your lives and your jobs and your passions. And so after we hand you some of our seeds, we're going to have breakout sessions and gather with you and hear your thoughts about what the mountain means and about what's going on with your efforts to reimagine people's relationships to nature. And we're going to make some more new seeds. And you'll give some of those to us, and we'll give some of those to you, and then we will go out into the world and sow these seeds of hope. So what we want to do is fairly rapidly, we have worked out an order in which we're going to come up here one by one and share our seeds with you, and we're going to try to do it briskly and keep it down to about an hour. And then we're going to have a little breakout. We're going to break out into small, then we're going to take a little break so you can fill up your water glasses and use the bathroom. And then we're going to gather in small groups, and a couple of us will join each a group and with some of you, and we'll talk about these ideas that have come up in our readings. And then we'll do that for about an hour, and we'll take another break and get some more water, and then we'll come back here and share our thoughts in a format that Tony Vo from the Spring Creek Project will lead us through. So, with that, the first thing, and we're just going to come up and tell you our names. I even forgot to do that, and just give our piece to you. And I'm thinking, I think we think of this as all of us giving one. At this point, just all of us doing this one thing. So I don't think you need to applaud for everyone. I think we can just kind of, if you're really on an urge to do it, just kind of store it up. And then there'll be a huge release at the end, a little volcanic eruption at the end. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Or a little burst of steam. That'll be fine. That'll be fine. So I'm going to start out by reading a poem by a wonderful American poet who couldn't come here, who was invited to come and wanted to come. And has done a lot of looking at Mount St. Helens, but couldn't be here for personal reasons. And that is a poem by Gary Snyder. Gary Snyder grew up working around Mount St. Helens when he was a teenager, and has written many wonderful books of poetry. In the year 2000, he came back to Mount St. Helens and hadn't been back for a very long time, and was very inspired by the landscape. In the first third of his new book, The Danger on Peaks, are poems, often in a prose poem kind of format, about Mount St. Helens. And I'm going to read the last in that section. In the first poem in the section, Snyder tells us that when he was here, first time he climbed Mount St. Helens, he came back down, and there were newspapers posted on the bulletin board at Spirit Lake Lodge that informed him that the atom bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. And he made a vow on the mountain, to the mountain. He called on the mountain to help him work for peace all his life. He tells us that in his first poem. And in the last poem, he reminds us of that vow. So I want you to know about that. It's called Pearly Everlasting. Walk a trail down to the lake, mountain ash and elderberries red, old growth log bodies blown about, whacked down, tumbled in the new ash waddies. Root mats tipped up, veiled in tall straight fireweed, fields of prone logs laid by blast in line, north, south, down, and silvery, limbless, barkless poles. Clear to the alpine ridgetop, all you see is toothpicks of dead trees, thousands of summers at detritus cycle rest, hard and dry in the sun. The long life of the down tree yet to go, bedded in bushes of pearly everlasting, dense white flowers, saplings of bushy, vibrant silver fir. The creek here once was Harmony Falls. The pristine mountain just a little battered now, the smooth dome gone, ragged crown. The lake was shady yin, now blinding water mirror of the sky, remembering days of fir and hemlock. No blame to magma or the mountain. And sit on a clean down log at the lake's edge, the water dark as tea. I had asked Mount St. Helens for help the day I climbed it, so it seems she did. Trees all lying flat like after that big party Siddhartha went to the night he left the house for good. Crowd of young friends whipped from sexy dancing, dozens crashed out on the floor, angelic boys and girls sleeping it off. A palace orgy of the gods, but what we see is blast zone, sprinkled with clusters of white flowers. Do not be tricked by human-centered views, says the Zen master Dogen. And Siddhartha looks it over, slips away for another forest to really get down on life and death. If you ask for help, it comes. But not in any way you'd ever know. Thank you, Luit, Lawalayetla, Smoky Ma, Gracias, Shishi, Grace.
I'm Scott Russell Sanders. My home is in the hardwood hill country of southern Indiana. Every morning when I'm at home, as soon as I rise from bed, I go to a window and I bow. And for the past 3 mornings, I've been privileged to wake in the presence of Mount St. Helens and in the company of some remarkable people and critters. And my first act has been to climb onto the ridge and bow to the mountain. For some years now, I've been trying to understand what I mean by that bow. What is it I'm honoring? What is it I'm acknowledging? Gratitude to begin with. Gratitude for the creation, for life, for my own chance to dwell for a spell amidst this marvelous, mysterious world. My bow expresses astonishment at the beauty and intricacy and elegance of the world. It expresses wonder at the size and age, first of the earth, and then of the entire universe. It expresses reverence for whatever power it is that impels and shapes all things. And my bow also expresses fear, the fear appropriate for a small, short-lived creature that inhabits one planet in one solar system, in one galaxy, in one tiny portion of the universe. And the fear that arises from knowing that not only I will pass away, but that everything I know and love will eventually be folded back into the way of things. Being here, I feel a profound gratitude to the people who worked and fought for decades so that this land and so many other lands could remain open for people. And not only the people who go about on 2 legs, but the people who go about on 4 legs and 6 legs and on wings and on scaly bellies and on fins. And not just for this generation, but for all generations. I will take away from my time at Mount St. Helens a deeper gratitude for the scientists, the administrators, and the others who are taking care of this place on behalf of all of us and on behalf of future generations. And I will take away a deeper appreciation and astonishment for the inventive, restless, ever-changing earth. And I will take away a deeper and more profound sense of awe. And I will carry that back to my home place. I will try to translate what I can of it into words and send the words back out onto the wind, into the world.
Hi, I'm Jerry Franklin, and Scott talked to you about awe, and I'm going to talk to you about ahas, ecological ahas. And this has been a place in which we have discovered things that have shifted and are continuing to shift our paradigms of what we understand about disturbance and what we understand about succession. And this has not been an easy set of lessons we've learned, and we have an awesome record of total failure in prediction. Maybe I shouldn't say total failure, but we have been consistently wrong in interpreting what was going to happen. And it began, of course, with the notion that this was a moonscape. As we flew back and forth across this landscape before they would let us land and begin our studies, and we thought, it's a moonscape. We get to watch it start from scratch. There's nothing left. And we came and we landed and we stepped from the helicopter, and at our feet were plants pushing up through the ash, and ants, and beetles, and gophers. And the lesson for us was a lesson of survivors. And very quickly over the days and weeks and months and years that followed, it became not just a lesson about survivors, but in fact a lesson which we came to label biological legacies. Not only the living, but also the dead organic material, particularly some of it that comes in the form of those big structures that we call snags and down logs. So that was the first lesson. And we had another idea about what would happen here. I mean, big disturbed area, I mean, immense. Obviously, you know, there's going to have to be a gradual process of migration of things in from the side. It's going to have to all gradually come back. So we'll have great long gradients of things coming back in. Wrong again. Those legacies. There weren't a few. There were hundreds. There were thousands. There were millions of these little legacies which became the centers of vegetation development, of colonization, so that the process of recolonization here was a process from thousands, tens of thousands, in fact millions of individual centers of recolonization that have grown and begun to coalesce. And one of the amazing things for me on this trip is to see how green this place has become. And it's in an exponential curve. And you are looking at the least vegetated piece of this entire landscape. And it is a tiny piece of the overall landscape affected by Mount St. Helens. So, guess what? Wrong again. Another thing, of course, that we've really focused on in all of this is recovery. Recovery. And our vision, what was our vision of recovery? Getting back to a landscape covered with forests. And the lesson that St. Helens is teaching us now is no. Your vision is wrong. You know, recovery is not about getting back to some condition that existed previously. It has to do with the establishment and development of entire new kinds of communities. And what do we see here in this landscape? We see the most diverse landscape that could ever exist here. One which is an incredible mix of plant life forms, which is in fact, highest in both the numbers of species of plants and animals, and probably in the populations of many of those plants, and certainly animals, as the work of people like Charlie Crisaifulli shows us. So, in fact, the lesson from St. Helens now is, no, don't speed this landscape to recreation of forests. If in fact, as we are on this federal landscape, we're interested in diversity, this is the most diverse time that we will ever see. And it will extend for probably, certainly another century, and perhaps another couple of centuries, with this incredible mosaic, this complexity, this diversity of plant life forms. And it makes us realize that it's places like this that are some of our regional hotspots of biological diversity, of songbirds, of amphibians, of reptiles, of butterflies. And consequently, a lesson to apply to other places is we need to be very sensitive to the role of these slowly recovering, meaning slowly reforesting, natural disturbed areas with their incredible legacies of living and dead. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ursula Leguin. I'm a very dirty writer. I kind of look forward to a bath tonight, I have to admit. We talked a lot these 3 days about science and poetry, and I sort of came out of it with this sense that science and poetry are both seeking to obtain understanding of the world by finding patterns. And science relies more on mathematics and abstraction, and poetry relies more on feeling and the concrete. But both are trying to be honest and accurate in their descriptions. And I think science and poetry need each other, they replenish each other. I think they are symbiotic. So I will read two little poems that I wrote here. The first is written in the ashed forest yesterday, with considerable borrowing from some of the language of the people who were describing where we were to us. And I want to thank Jerry particularly for the last line of the poem. What fearful wonders here have come to pass. Up through a gray mosaic of shattered glass, the seedling silver firs poke tender needles. Though small herbs died, the bigger ones got by. And to enliven this earth that fell out of the sky, there is an excellent assemblage of beetles. I had not ever heard the phrase an assemblage of beetles before. And this is the view from my tent on the volcano. The mist lifts off the little lake down there, way down, across a gulf of shining air. The upward spiral song of Swanson's thrush, the white-crown's teedle-eedle in the hush. There is such singing in the morning where was only silence and gray dust and ash. We are her children. We are in her care, our kind destroyer, sings the mountain thrush.
I'm Tim McNulty. I'm a writer. When I first came to Mount St. Helens as a young poet, I was drawn here by the pristine and feminine and graceful beauty of what we call the Fujiyama of the Northwest. I paid homage to the summit in 1978, and then 2 years later stood back with the rest of the world in shock and awe and grief for a couple from my small town on the Olympic Peninsula who were killed in the blast. since then, largely through the work of the scientists that are gathered here, I've come to appreciate visiting this landscape as being present at the creation. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm always a little speechless in the face of awesome creation, and my approach is to try to pay attention to the small details and to look for wonder and meaning and revelation in what I see before me. Unlike Ursula, I haven't finished any poems over the last few days, but I have some rough notes from, I mean rough as in raw and uncooked, notes from a little walk we did yesterday from, I believe it was the Smith River a trailhead up here to the overlook. And I wanted to share those with you. We ascend the bright paintbrush. We ascend through bright paintbrush, healing fireweed tossing in the wind, the pearly everlasting dancing Pollyannish over this impermanent land. The lake below is littered with a floating forest, continents assembling and disassembling in the wind like tectonic plates. Our path is cut through a blow-down fir, wide rings of rapid growth at its heart, sprung from an earlier disturbance, and tight-grained rings at the outer edge, centuries of quiet growth. Then, one day, Junko says, "Same world, Tim." We skirt beneath a palisade of old lava cliffs, silver gray snags like Doric columns, loose slope to the lake below. On a ledge in the steep cliff face, a lovely columbine blossom, wind-tossed sacrifice, teach the joys of endurance. Round the final bend to the mountain, short-lived crater spilling the blessing of earth-warmed water to the pumice plain. We stand at the windy altar by the gate of Eden, more powerful, frightening yet brimming with hope for this wounded world than we ever dared to imagine.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Pyle, and I live in a little tributary, off a little tributary, sometimes in the tributary of the lower Columbia River, I think about 50 miles that way. So a very short little story on me, and then a short poem. When Charles wrote to us about the plan for this foray, one phrase that caught my attention is that we'll be camping on a log landing. Now, I live in the Willapa Hills, and I know log landings. And I was not optimistic about our chances for getting tent stakes in the ground, let alone sleeping. So when we got to this actually rather nice log landing, I immediately went down into the noble fir plantation, which is assuming the aspects of young forest. And I spotted a little terrace between two noble firs, each about 20 feet high, 25. And it was a perfect campsite. It was level, it was mossy, and it looked very inviting, but it had one flaw, or what, not a flaw at all for it, but for me, and that was a beautiful little lupin plant, not flowering yet, unfurling yet, was growing right in the middle of the moss. And I said, am I going to lie on that and crush it? Because when I lie on something, it stays pretty laid on. Laid on? Crushed. So I said, yes, I am, because it's far and away the best looking tent site I've seen. So I made my apologies and set up my tent and camped there and slept quite well. It was a fine tent site, except that I forgot that the doors of my new tent are on the side, so I had to crawl out into the skirts of the fir every time I got out of my tent. But it was a good tent site. So when I took up my tent today, I wondered how that lupin fared, and I was pretty sure it was going to be sort of undifferentiated chlorophyll by this time. And lo and behold, I took up the tent and the footprint, and there was the lupin, kind of like a pressed plant in herbarium, but the terminal bud and the little tiniest little unfurling leaflet was erect. I couldn't believe it. It sprang up, and I felt very happy. Well, then I was sort of making an attempt at ablutions, and I had my shirt off, and I was packing up, and I said, Well, I think I want to lie once bare-chested on that moss just to feel it close to me and to make some sort of a vainglorious apology and thank you for the sight, which I did. And I was lying there on the moss, and then I said, oh shoot, I just lay down on the lupin again. And it can't possibly have survived this time. But it did. So this little poem is for the lupins and all the others, besides ourselves, and ourselves as well. It's also early in its embryology. And this is called When Once in Mount St. Helens Lap. When Vox's swifts propel from Snag to Meta Lake's clear air and catch the morning's hatch of bronze-black caddisflies, and nighthawks in the dusking mouth the moths that come to firelight, when snowberry checker spots cruise the pumice summit for penstemon and cushion plant distilling nectar from tephra, when valerian and cow parsnip, meadow rue and montia, saxifrage and goat's beard, not to mention oplo, panax, horridem, all leap from the frightening, sheltering ledge, their comity of scents sweetens death, and in mirroring the pallor of the floating forest down below, make of all that dying an utter act of life, and three ravens saunter past and say, it's so. When Lorquin's limonitis seals her eggs on willow leaves above the falling wall, glides the rim of the abyss. And when barn swallows scream their struggle toward their nest on Windy Ridge, rename Windy Ridge, decide to call it Windy Ridge, and rough-winged swallow redefines the slot of the Green River along with bare-stemmed buckwheat, which feeds blue copper butterfly, which alloys ultraviolet into infra-blue. When Sitka alder, noble fir, western hemlock and hazel, cottonwood and silver fir reach, each raising the forest in their own sweet time, when 6 different wintergreens bloom in the forest of ash, and usnea and rhacomitrium, lichen and moss, bolete and yellow slime mold travel at their chosen speeds as western toad and long-horned beetle hold down the ground. And a tiny white cloud in the center of a hole in the canopy, when glassed, becomes a sun-struck spider in her orb 100 feet up, slung across the blue gap in the green tops of Douglas fir, when lupin and paintbrush, daisy and hawkbit, pearly everlasting over all, cloak the popcorn rocks, where bumblebees come to be compliant with petal, complicit with pollen, and sedges blow heavy in the wind, and golden-mantled ground squirrels skitter past the legs of poets. Well, when Lou Witt blew this whole place up, all these are what came forth.
Thank you, Ursula, for showing me how this microphone works. Those of us who are vertically disadvantaged. My name is Ann Swinger. I'm an illustrator and a writer. And I've been drawing this mountain into my memory. It's been a wonderful experience. It's been a wonderful experience to have this combination, because natural history writers need scientists, and maybe we can persuade scientists that they need natural history writers. But it's been a spectacular exchange of information, and thanks to Maggie for making this possible for all of us. It's been a unique gathering of ideas supported by people, and people supported by ideas. So thank you. I hope this kind of communication across different disciplines can continue in a very serious and happy and joyous way. It means that we've been learning like crazy, and we've been oohing and eyeing at the lupin and the Indian paintbrush and all the gorgeous things in bloom, but we've also been learning why they're there, why they're here and not someplace else, what they need, how they grow, and how they say thanks. This landscape, I had forgotten, was not a new landscape for me. I worked out here about 35 years ago, but downstream on Mount Hood, up in the Alpine. And so coming back here was a reawakening of a time and space that I had kind of forgotten in the busyness of time. I think that being a natural history writer helps you sharpen your observation skills. But it also means that I've been working with tumbled landscapes for a good many years, and perhaps more intensely of late. Some of them are man-made, like Glen Canyon Dam, and what's happened to the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. And those changes, which, after not doing any research before they built the dam, everybody is now scurrying around and trying to make amends. And it don't work very well. And I've also been dealing with a non-human made disaster in the making of having one of the biggest forest fires in Colorado come within half a mile of the place I love most in the world. I think that I've become very aware of what loss or the potential for loss means in our lives. And as I have been thinking about what I wanted to say, I realized that I was thinking of all those great lines that we remember. Shakespeare and Julius Caesar, et tu, Brute, those sad, clutching lines. Stonewall Jackson's exquisite lines. Let us cross the river and rest under the shade of the trees. And General Robert E. Lee's quiet line. His last words were, strike the tents. And looking at the building on the rim of the hill behind me, I remembered those lines that no one here will ever forget. Vancouver, this is it. So let us be mindful that in loss there is thankfulness. And remember that thankfulness is a gift that we have because we have language. And let us be very thankful for many things, as I am to be here and to share this time with you. Thank you.